You are listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 152. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where I show you how life with less alcohol is more fun than you think. I work with high achievers who struggle to drink a glass of wine without it turning into 2 bottles. I'm the one they call when they want to take it or leave it. So if you want to change your relationship with alcohol that doesn't involve counting days sober, you're in the right place. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today I want to talk about alcohol and driving, and mainly with regard to being the designated driver. And I'm going to be covering the often overlooked joys, yes, joys of being the designated driver. Now, I have a subtitle. If I would give a subtitle to this episode, it would be on finding freedom in responsibility. Now, let's first talk about the designated driver, right? So if you think about that role, if you're going out in a group of friends and whoever is the designated driver, how is it typically seen? Well, it's typically seen, I would offer, as being the sensible one. It's the one who misses out on the fun. It's not something that people necessarily like, and it's a role that, gets shared. So it's your turn. It was my turn last week. And I just want to turn that whole way of looking at it on its head. Now, I didn't always think of it in those terms. And in fact, I want to start by talking about an event I went to. My gosh, it must be about 7 years ago now, but it stayed very clearly in my memory. We were going for a night out in a local town. It was about a half an hour, I would say, drive away from where we lived. It was actually a school event. It was one of the end of year school celebrations. And the parents were going to have a dinner in a marquee, and there was going to be wine and all the rest of it. It was all sort of part of the deal. And of course, I really wanted to have a drink, and my husband was sure he wanted to have a drink. So I thought, I had to drive to it because you couldn't get to it by public transport. So I thought I would be sensible. And in the end, I booked a hotel in that town. And in fact, we did stay there that night. So on paper, it made sense. And of course, that was the sensible thing to do, as we were both going to be drinking. But when I look back, yes, we stayed overnight in a hotel, but it was so close to where we lived. Yes, it made sense from when we didn't want to drink drive, of course, but it was just 30 minutes. And it ended up being a not great hotel. It was pretty crummy, actually, and woke up in the morning and just felt rather stupid that I'd booked this hotel that ended up not being great, simply because I had insisted I wanted to drink the night before. And guess what? The wine they'd served was not good. It was rubbish. It really wasn't good. You find this at these events, right? It's not going to be the drink. It's not going to be the level of wine that you might typically want to buy. So we had shelled out for this hotel. We had stayed overnight, and that whole thing wasn't even special because it was just 30 minutes away. And it just felt like a bit of a waste. If only I had been willing to not drink. And the whole experience was not improved by this. In fact, I would have had a far better evening had I just said, look, I'm just not going to drink tonight and I'm going to drive home. We could have woken up in our own bed 30 minutes away. So that's just an example of something I went through. So I want to really ask you at the beginning of this episode, what if being the designated driver could be the most liberating choice that you would make? How would that change the narrative of fun and responsibility? Could fun and responsibility go hand in hand? And if you think about it in this way, how could it be empowering? How could it be truly empowering to be the designated driver and for it not to be a burden that one has to bear? So those are the questions I want to ask. All right, so let's wind back a little bit and start with what I would offer are some misconceptions about being the designated driver, and that culturally, drinking and fun go hand to hand, and not drinking and fun do not go hand in hand. Right? How many of you would think that being the designated driver means that you would be quote unquote missing out on festivities. I mean, just want you to think about that. Think about all the jokes that go around it. It's your turn now. Oh, you're the lucky one. Oh, poor you. How's the water? How's the orange juice? Now, this comes up when we go to these social gatherings. There's a fun atmosphere. There's laughter and drinking. And it can be, and I have done this before, where the designated driver kind of feels like they're on the sidelines. Even if you are not literally sitting on the sidelines, although that can also happen, you can feel that way. People will joke, "Can I buy you a drink?" "Oh, no, I can't," right? Because you're the designated driver tonight. So no wonder many people, when they are having this role, when it's their turn, that they're being responsible. Yes, that's all good, but it means it's going to be boring, right? And they can't wait for it to be over, and they can't wait for someone else to have it. And that also then leads to a reluctance to really be the designated driver in the future. Now, here's the thing about all of this. Yes, it is true, and I have experienced it myself, and I see it happening to others when we're out and about, that the designated driver can be the butt of the jokes, or can be the butt of the, okay, you're not having the fun tonight. But really, what happened when I look back in my case, I found it was me who had all the stories about the designated driver being the boring one. I had all these stories about it not being fair. These are all my stories, right? All the rest of it was all something I was conjuring up and thinking in my own mind. It didn't really matter actually what anyone else thought or said, because I was the one who had the strongest story. So I'd like to encourage you to reflect on your own experience. Have you ever felt that kind of social pressure? How did that make you feel about electing to be the designated driver, or maybe even being nominated? And really look at yourself. Is it you who has the stories? Is it you who's telling yourself all this stuff? It's not just those other people. Now, secondly, I want to move on to this idea that I teased up in the introduction about the freedom that comes from being the designated driver. Now, I want you to think of this. This gives you and grants you a huge sense of control and empowerment, especially if you're making conscious choices that are aligned with the values and your long-term goals. If over the long term, as you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming this to be the case, that you want to be drinking less or rarely, or have much more control over this, be reducing your alcohol intake, how could volunteering to be the designated driver be a part of that change? Right? You don't necessarily have to enjoy it at the beginning. You don't even have to necessarily see the freedom and feel empowered by it, but it's an action you're taking towards where you want to be. And I want you to think about the peace of mind. I mean, this for me is huge, by the way. The peace of mind that comes with knowing that you're being responsible for yourself, right? Whatever, you don't have to rely on anybody else, because believe me, I have been in those situations, not with my husband, I will say, but with other people, when I've gone out for the night and there's going to be a designated driver, and then they end up drinking, right? And then that's like, okay, what am I going to do? I need to find another way home. And this is something, by the way, I'm always telling my children. If the designated driver has a drink, if they sort of renege on their responsibilities, you still be responsible to yourself. Do not get in that car. So if you're the one being the designated driver, this is what I say to myself, I could get huge power and pride from knowing that I was being responsible to myself, being responsible to other people. And this, by the way, reduces all the stress and potential consequences. Not only, of course, because all the risks there are with drink driving that I just don't want to go near. I mean, that's just not something, that's a big red line, would never do that. But there's the peace of mind that comes from knowing that you aren't going to be facing that. It's not going to be a conversation, and that you're not going to have to find another way home. You have a way home. That, by the way, is a huge freedom I have. I can always drive anywhere at any time. I want you to think also about if you are willing to be the designated driver, or you don't even have to say that I'm going to do this, but you just decide you're not going to drink when you're going out. It actually allows for spontaneous adventure. Right? You meet up with some friends and we talk about going to some new place. You can say, I can drive us. Or maybe it's late night. Maybe you've been at home and just been chilling, and all of a sudden you hear about some new disco or nightclub, or you want to go meet some friends and say, I can drive. I can drive us there. There are huge benefits to being that person during the evening. I talk this about a lot. I mean, I'm not as you know, I'm not a judge on this. I'm not on about just going 100% sobriety if that's not what you want. But being the designated driver means that you will be sober. You will not be drinking for the night. That gives you an opportunity, I think, to have more meaningful conversations. It means you will listen more. You will find your fun in other places. It really is something to behold. I mean, if you look at the whole thing, so you're rather looking at this a pain and a heavy responsibility, but something to go towards. You will change your view on it. The next thing I want to talk about is there are social perks of being the designated driver, right? Your friends, I know my friends, genuinely appreciate the responsibility I'm taking on, even though I'm the one who just really doesn't drink anymore. They don't take it for granted. No, they really don't take it for granted. And they know, I mean, they check with me beforehand, but they do know they can relax and enjoy their night if that's how they want to do. If they want to drink, knowing that the stress of transportation is not to be considered, because I'm quite happy to do that for them. It actually creates a bit of a sense of community, I think, as well with people, especially if you don't know the people that so well and you're the driver. And I know I become everybody's favorite friend at that time of the night. I remember a party we went to a couple of years ago when all of the guests, it was someone's housewarming and they didn't have a big enough house for us all to stay. So all of the guests, we were all put up in a local hotel a couple of miles down the road. And the party organizer laid on minibuses to transport people from the hotel back to their house and at the end of the evening. So that was all good, right? It was all really well organized. But guess what? It was a really rainy night. And of course, there were more people because, you know, when it was time for the party, when the party ended, you know what it's like. One person leaves and everybody left and there weren't enough seats and people had to wait for the next minibus and so on. Of course, there was me in my car driving. Anna is everybody's best friend. I had, because it was me and my husband, I had I think we had 4 slots, 4 seats available. And then, you know, people piled in and were very happy to be my friend. So that was kind of fun. And I felt, I will admit, a bit smug. I am smug. I can drive. I don't have to wait for the minibus in the cold. You know, I can just drive myself home those 5 minutes or back to the hotel, those 5-10 minutes, and then be asleep shortly after. So I want you to think about that. I want you to think about what it brings you as well as what it brings other people, how it helps you to create more memorable experiences, right? Because you'll be sober. You'll be able to figure out options and figure out what's best in the moment. And there's kind of a caringness that goes, not that you're responsible for other people. Of course you are not. But I think there's another element to it where knowing that you're being responsible, you can take pride in that and that feels good in the moment. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, yes, I'd love to get to the point where I don't mind being the designated driver, I really want you to think about shifting your mindset. I want you to view it rather than as a chore. I mean, firstly, do a little analysis, right? Here's your homework. Right, you know my homework I give. Get a pen and paper and jot down, what do you currently think about being the designated driver? Is it a chore? Is it something that you don't want to do? Do you avoid it? Do you insist on others to drive? And then I want you to look at how you could change your narrative around it. I want to encourage you to think about it as a position of strength and empowerment rather than as a limitation. Remember, I mean, I talk about this so often on the podcast. Drinking alcohol does not create fun. You are the one who creates fun. How can you create fun for yourself being the designated driver? And a strong hint from me is that the freedom it gives you, knowing that, again, you are safe and always able to drive, that for me, that there's so much goodness that comes from that. So here are a few practical little tips you might want to consider if you are in the designated driver zone and you're thinking, don't really want to do that. Of course, as I just said, reframe and shift your mindset. That's a big one. Don't look at it as a chore, but look at it as freedom. You get to decide what goes on the radio, right? What music gets listened to. That can be your domain. That can be something that it doesn't matter what the others want. I'm the driver. I get responsibility over that. I want you to think that you will be the one, if there's going to be any conversation that goes on in the car, You're going to be the one that's going to be the clearest in mind. And that can be fun, right? It can just be fun listening to the drunk people thinking that they're being so smart. But for me, my really favorite part is this sense of smugness that I get knowing that I'll always be in control. I know how I'm going to get home, which means I don't have to have any worry before, during, or after the party, as I'll be sober at the party. I also know that if I'm not having a great time, that if I'm thinking it's boring, then it's just a boring party for me, right? Alcohol would only have made me pretend it was better, and I don't need to pretend. I can live my life knowing exactly, being as the modern term would be, being very authentic. Another part of it being smug is that it doesn't matter where an event is. It could be in the middle of the country with no public transport and no hotels. It really doesn't matter because I can get myself home. I do not need to wait. New Year's Eve. Think about New Year's Eve. Gosh, I remember one years ago, we had to wait what seemed like hours for a taxi because everyone was taxiing. Now we don't need to. I drive. I don't fear the police pulling us over. I mean, I want you to think about that level of freedom, because I get the biggest treat. I get to go home to my own bed very quickly. I love the fact that I'm not relying on anyone else. I love the fact that I don't have to worry if the person who's going to be the designated driver decides to fulfill that role or not. Right? I don't have to worry about any of that. So I really want you to think about not making this a chore. You can celebrate it. Now, if you don't want to go as far as celebrating it, at least I want you to, in your mind, to be certain of yourself, just evaluate, look at how you think about it. And what I've offered in this episode are the misconceptions surrounding the designated driver role. And I want you to view how being the responsible one is empowering, not boring. And look at some of the social benefits that arise from this choice. And by the way, this sense of responsibility that you have, it's about enjoying life to the fullest. I mean, really think about this, embracing the whole evening rather than just, enjoying the party bit. It's the before and after as well. So that was what I wanted to cover this week. I really want to reset and reframe the whole concept of being the designated driver, and the responsibility and the freedom that comes from this. And if you would like to explore enhancing that freedom in your life by completely changing and transforming your relationship with alcohol, let's talk. This is what I do. This is how I help people. So you will not feel alone. To book some time with me, and by the way, the first call is free. Go to 90 Days Later, so that's 90dayslater.co, and click on book a call. And in that call, we're going to talk about where you are, where you want to be, and I will build for you on the call the exact steps for you to take to get you to where you want to be. There will be no confusion, no questions left open. All right, so that's 90dayslater.co. Click on the book a call. Otherwise, I will see you next week.